Welcome to Going Deep, Brandon Angelo, Matt Waldman.
What's going on?
Yeah, it's a good time. A few weeks after the draft now, fantasy leagues are getting started, and certainly we've had some of our drafts. We were talking about a few of ours before the show. So we thought it'd be fun to just kind of talk about players that maybe, we least want to take, but we're kind of sticking to our boards and taking them anyway. Maybe players we're most likely to reach for, who we think's going to sizzle and fizzle, and then also, who we think some of the biggest risers will be at running back and receiver at this time next year. So, without further ado, first of all, if you haven't gotten your subscription to Brandon's work over at Angelo's Analysis or at Angelo_fantasy on Twitter, you should check out the work that he's doing. Absolutely worth the money. You get video analysis, you get, great metric analysis, absolutely worthwhile. So, definitely go check that out. And of course, you got Matt Waldman,
Got the
Yeah,
RSP.
yeah,
Got the
mattwaldman.com.
RSP.
So
Yes,
you can
sir.
do that too. You get your post draft cheat sheet, depth chart options, and so far everything's been kind of fun on that realm. Though unless you're like me and you're drafting leagues with people who buy your work, and I know Brandon can relate to that. So it's fun
Yeah.
to try and like figure out what you're going to do with some of these things. So getting started. Who's the player like right now as you're looking at drafts or in the middle of them who you least want to take in fantasy drafts, but you stick to your board and you wind up taking him because you just are like, why do I wind up with him? Even though like I know like it's worth it in
Yeah.
theory, but like he wasn't the one I really wanted.
100%. I think the one is it's been Bo Nix for me
Okay.
because I have him fairly high because I like the landing spot. I give him a pretty high infrastructure grade because I think he fits really well with Sean Payton in that offense. But it's not like a sexy pick. Like he's probably not going to be a QB2 on most of my teams. Would be a QB3. But like in like the second round of rookie drafts, like hit rate's not great. So I think a safer QB3 is like it's not fun, but it's safe.
Yeah.
And he's definitely one for me. The other one's Ben Sinnott. He's one that's been big. I like him a
Yes.
ton, and he's pretty high on my board. I think he's a top 12 player, quarterback, receiver, running back, tight end for me in this draft. And like in non-tight end premium leagues, it's hard because you know you have teams where you have guys like your Travis Kelsey's, your Kittles, your Laportas, your McBrides, and you're kind of set the position. Then a guy like Sanatt's like too good of value to pass up sometimes, especially like in the early third round in most leagues. So it's tougher to pass up on him too. But I'd say definitely the first one's Bo Nix because it drives me nuts because I'm like he's pretty safe as a
Yeah.
QB3. I think he could be maybe a QB2 if that offense gets weapons, but like it's a safer pick for what you get at that juncture in the draft. But it's interesting because there's been a few guys, but those are definitely my main two. Who are some of yours?
Yeah, well, Nix is funny because as someone who likes Bo Nix more than most, I feel the same way when he gets around to me, where I'm like,
Yeah,
and a lot of it has to do with what Denver's offense looks like right now.
but
But
yeah,
if
for sure.
it's almost like I think it's worth discussion. Just saying that there's good and bad with every coach and every player, and we remember certain narratives and things that can kind of sway us. And I do think the thing that sways us is that Sean Payton when he was with Breeze and he had that offense that he was doing there, you absolutely would have taken someone like Bo Nix in
100%.
that situation. But now that after the debacle with Russell Wilson and the lack of talent that's really on there, it's like we've lost a little bit of our faith in Peyton to like rebuild that thing quick enough or be able to do it and do it with Knicks. But I'm still like I haven't had the situation where I've had to like where I've looked at it and go the value's taking Knicks right now. But I think I would pull the trigger. But I still feel but I'm had to be in the situation where I've looked at it and go, the possibility might be I'm taking Knicks right here, and I could feel the same pain you were feeling, like kind of like,
Right.
oh, that pit in my stomach, like really, you know. For me, I mean, this feels like first world problems when I say this, but like first round, Brian Thomas Jr. Like
Yes.
you
Yeah,
know, I'm
for
I'm
sure.
I'm kind of wishing I could get Xavier Worthy or Lad McConkey, and they fall into me. And then I could get Keon Coleman, and I like Keon Coleman, but Jonathan Brooks is gone, and I probably there's be drafts where I might consider Brooks over Thomas, even though I have them pretty close and Thomas slightly ahead. But I look at Thomas and I go, yeah, I know, I listen to what Brandon had to say, what you had to say about him, um, a couple weeks ago when we were on in terms of the fit, like short term, long term, and some of the things that could happen. And then I look at it and go, yeah, I gotta trust my board. Like I'm not loving this completely,
Right.
but I like Trevor Lawrence. I like what I've seen out of Trevor Lawrence, even with the bad how things started last year. I did some analysis on him last year. When I looked at how often he got hit and just how things shaped up for him, I thought he played better than his stats. And so I'm kind of looking at that and going, okay, I can see this working out. I'm okay with it. Sanat for me is another one too, where I look at that and I go, just don't. I'm not as enthusiastic or optimistic about the offensive fit yet, and I think we discussed that as well. But it's
Yeah.
just seeing, if Zach Ertz was his best year with them, and yeah, it's an older Zach Ertz, was 588 yards, but the other tight ends combined for 400 to 500 yards when Ertz wasn't there. Right. I'm like, is it really going to change, especially with those receivers they have in the running game with Austin Eckler? So, and then if he's a fullback, because we talked about the whole use check, Kittle, which one is he? Is it, so that one gets me a little worried. And then I would say A.D. Mitchell, just 100%. Yeah, like if I'm at the end of the second round and some of these guys aren't there that I really like, and I'm looking at like A.D. Mitchell and Marshawn Lloyd, and as much as I'm like, I think about some Mitchell, especially Mitchell, Franklin, Sano, and Lloyd. That's like a weird zone for me.
It's a really strange zone, especially because like it's got like a hodgepodge of players too. Yeah. So Mitchell's always one for me where like I'm probably not going to have a share, just because there's always been someone in my league that takes him earlier than I would ever take it.
Yeah.
Because I believe in the upside, and obviously like he was getting first. He was being mocked in the first round.
Yeah.
For a better part of the draft year. So it's really interesting to see what, Shane Steichen and that whole crew's going to have drawn up for him and what they're going to do with it. But he's one that could be a riser.
Yeah, if I'm like pretty set at receiver with those four, I'm going with Lloyd just because I'll take the chance on the talent. So I'm kind of like, okay, I'll do that. If I'm not strong at running back and I'm not strong at receiver, or I can shore up my weaknesses at receiver, I'm probably taking the chance on the wide receiver. I'm probably going with Mitchell, even though I have fears he's that, what Jameson Williams has been or what Henry Ruggs has been. That like I fear that's where he's going to get pigeonholed, and then he's not going to give me that return on value that I'm hoping for. Whereas with Lloyd, maybe I can get a little more out of the promise of him. So it still makes it a hard decision. And then it's a no-brainer, even with qualms, if it's a 1.5 PPR for tight ends, then I'm taking Sanat. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So what about players then that, you're most likely going to reach for? They're there. You're looking at it and say, I'm not saying like 5 or 6 picks early, because that's like trading back material where you're trying to be like surgical, and most people don't do that very well. I'm talking like you're taking this guy a round and a half early because you're not getting him if you don't take him at that spot.
Yeah. Yep. Oh man, I think my two is I've been most consistent in Jermaine Burton
Yes.
because I think he's going to be the heir apparent when obviously T. Higgins is on the way out potentially in Cincinnati, and that's kind of what we hope. If he is, then I think he's going to see a massive value bump. Then obviously Javon Baker, like he's one I'm taking in the early to middle second round in most cases. In the second round in general, like your hit rate's not super high, so I'm either like grab a really safe player that I feel great about, like his teammate Jalen Polk, right?
Yeah.
Or swing for the fences with the guy I think that could be the future of that offense in Javon Baker. So those are my big two. Besides that, Michael Penix, he's one I've been trading up for a ton because he seemed to fall a lot in a lot of the drafts I've been in. And you love his talent. If you haven't read his write-up on the RSP, read it. It will make you a fan of Michael Penix. But for me, it was a really big deal when you kind of look at Kirk Cousins and the longevity he doesn't have. Yeah. Right? I believe he's going to be 36 years old, coming off of an Achilles rupture. Maybe has 2 years. Maybe. And in Dynasty, having a second quarterback is really everything, especially if you play in obviously super flex and 6 point per passing touchdown leagues in particular. But for me, Penix is someone that I've been trading up for because I think you can get a massive value, similar to Burton, but massive value in the second round with Michael Penix because he's gonna be a starter eventually. I think within 2 years. I don't think he's going to start his rookie year unless Kirk gets hurt. But I could see him at the end of next year being the starter.
Yeah, easily Penix for me. Penix and Burton are my two as well. I mean, because and Burton I've taken around, or I traded a first round pick next year for a first round pick at the bottom of the first round to take him just because I'd value the receivers this year, and I don't know what next year looks like. Clearly, but I know how good this year looks. So if I can get a chance, I've gotten one league I was just telling Brandon about is I got Brian Thomas, and then at one point at the 114, I traded back in with my first round pick to get Burton because I don't think I'll get another player next year likely at the end of the first round if I had that pick who was on par with Burton. So, especially with Joe Burrow throwing to him. So, if it doesn't work out, I still am okay with it in theory. And then with Penix, I knew I wasn't getting Penix in that league. One of my former editors and good friends actually literally mentioned me in the draft just about an hour ago, saying he was taking him at the end of the third round. So he got him at 310, I think, or 38. Sure. And decided to take him, which is fine. I mean that makes total sense. That's pick 27. Is where I had him in ADP, and he's got him, around that range. So those are two guys that certainly I would tread for. I haven't had a chance at them yet, but Blake Corum and Jaylen Wright are two guys that I might reach for a little bit.
Jaylen Wright is a huge one. I think, especially with Mostert being up there in age, in kind of the same vein like Trey Benson too, if you think about it, because kind of a similar situation where James Conner's reaching 30, right? Raheem Mostert is going to be 32, I think, at the end of next year. So it's like this is probably Raheem Mostert's last usable year.
Yeah.
And then they want Devon Achane to be the freshest Devon Achane he can be and work in the efficiency category. But, the touch leader at the running back position at the end of next year might just be Jaylen Wright. So in a great offense. So that's a really big one.
Okay, so
100% agree.
Yeah. So then how about a player who's most likely to sizzle in camp, but you just think is going to fizzle in their rookie season? Doesn't mean they're going to bomb their entire career. It might be that too, but you're looking at them and going, I can see reporters just really getting excited about some element of this guy, and then you just know, like, who's the kid out of Nevada 2 years? Romeo Doubs.
Oh yeah. He was a really big one.
Yeah.
There's two.
All
I
right.
think obviously one I don't think is super controversial, and AD Mitchell,
Yeah.
where I mean he really looks the part when there's no contact. Like he's fast, he's fluid. You can kind of see all the traits that people that wowed people and made people think he was a top 20 pick in this year's draft, right? He's a big one. I think the other one's Jaden Daniels.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think you can see how well he spins it. He has good control, but this is a really interesting Washington offense that if you look at the offense on paper and you look who's helmet Cliff Kingsbury, it might not be a very good offense. Like they might be in the bottom third in terms of points scored. So I think he's going to have a little bit more growing pains than, let's say, like a Caleb Williams, who has a much better infrastructure surrounding him, better supporting cast, better offensive line, better defense. So I think it's going to be a little bit more rocky for Jaden Daniels, and I think he's going to look great throwing in shorts. But when it starts to get a little muddier for him, like Terry McLaurin's great, but I don't think he's not the wide receiver one I would want for my starting rookie quarterback.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing that's tough is like they, outside of McLaurin too, like they don't really have another trustworthy option in the passing game, right? Jahan Dotson's okay. You know, Sano and company at tight end, and Austin Eckler, and you know, it's like late career Austin Eckler too, and Brian Robinson. It's like it doesn't really excite you and make you think that, hey, this is gonna be a good offense for my rookie quarterback. Because you look at Cliff Kingsbury when he had, you know, D Hop and Kyler Murray, Marquise Brown, they still weren't putting up a ton of points.
Yeah.
So that's the crazy thing is I just don't see him coming out guns blazing and lining it up. But those are definitely my two guys.
No, listen, you know, I wish Cliff Kingsbury the best of luck, and I think, you know, he doesn't care to give two flips about anything that we would be saying, but at the same time, you know, we wish him well and hope that it works out. But on a comic level, I look at him and I just look at his career, and I feel like I'm watching a corporate executive at like a company that's absconded funds, and
Sure.
like he finds his way onto another board, like so, and just gets off scot free. Like the Johnny Manziel era, you know, he just fails upward. Like he seems to be failing upward at every turn, and that may not be true, but it feels that way sometimes when you look at,
For sure.
you
Oh,
know,
absolutely.
how that's gone. So I'm with you on Jaden Daniels because yeah, the you know, we've talked about his processing of the field. I think that, you know, some people are overestimating how well he processes. I think he'll get better at it, but I don't think it's going to be a year one thing where it's going to be really strong. And I'm with you with the infrastructure. I'm gonna say Trey Benson. I like Trey Benson. I like him as a draft pick, but I think the game's going to be a little fast for him. I think he's going to
100%.
be. He's one of those guys that's ultra aggressive, hit it hard. He's got a little bit of that Tevin Coleman thing going on with him. Not as to the degree that Coleman did, but I think he's going to benefit from having, you know, James Conner in front of him, but he's not
Oh,
going to realize
100%.
how much of a benefit that was until like end of September when he's probably benched or losing some touches and watching from afar and going, that's what I'm not doing. That's what I'm bouncing these plays. I'm hitting this too fast. I'm not doing this. You know, I'm not taking the side I need to take. The game's just a little too fast and I'm overthinking some things. So I think he's certainly on my list is that I think will look better in shorts, and people will talk about his speed and how aggressive of a runner he is and how he made some great catch up the boundary. And then when it's time to put it all together, it's just not quite there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I was funny. I was on my walk today, and he was one I was talking to my buddy about, because I think it's like with Trey Benson and Marshawn Lloyd to an extent too. It's like the game already moves too fast for them collegiately.
Yeah.
You can kind of see that at times, more like from a perceptual cognitive perspective. they can't slow things down enough to see the full picture.
Yeah.
And at the running back position, that's the biggest thing, right? And so for him to be behind a guy like James Conner, it's perfect. It's a perfect guy to learn from. Because I think next year, James Conner isn't out in his contract. He's a free agent. I don't think they go back to James Conner unless it's a low-level deal. But I think they're going to be looking to give Trey Benson the reins. And it's a good/better offense, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be interesting to see if he can handle that. Because I think he can be, him and Marshawn Lloyd are kind of in that like Isaiah Pacheco archetype.
Yeah. Where
it's see it, hit it. But Pacheco slowed some things down in his game and has become a pretty legitimate starting running back in the league. Like he can start for a lot of teams. And I think the difference is always going to be, can they slow the game down enough to make the requisite down-to-down decisions? And Trey Benson can't right now. Marshawn Lloyd can't right now. But they're in a spot, both those guys, where they don't have to. They can just sit and learn and bide their time and just only bite off what they can chew in a game. And then hopefully next year they can take the reins and go from there.
Yeah, and I think the difference between those three backs in college is that Benson and Lloyd actually, at least for parts of their career, had sound enough blocking that wasn't a complete disaster. So when you saw that the game was a little too fast for them in that scenario, it was a little different than, say, Pacheco, who had at least an excuse with a lot of the blocking he had. So in a way, you could project that, because I was projecting. I'm like, when he gets to the league and they run trap or power, he's going to be like, oh, this is a little easier because I don't have to like try and negotiate both the penetration and my slow center who can't get to his spot.
No, you're 100% right. It was like when like you watched David Montgomery come out of Iowa State when they were ranked. I remember like looking at the offensive line rankings. And Iowa State was in the last the 3 years Montgomery was there was like 120th, 118th, 115th. And you can kind of see that when he got in the league too. Like he was expecting the blocking to be that bad. Yeah. It impacted his play as a rookie, but now you see David Montgomery as being one of the more reliable down-to-down runners in the NFL.
Yeah.
Because it takes time to kind of figure that out and iron that out from a cognitive perspective because you're just you're stuck in the mud for X number of years collegiately, like Pacheco, Montgomery, and then it takes a little while to kind of unpack it. But I think you can see something similar with, Benson and Lloyd. I think their blocking was obviously, as cleaner than those two, but I think that's a big deal and something that we should definitely take into account.
I'm going to add Ricky Pearsall to the list just because I don't think they're trading. It sounds like they're not trading anybody. At least
which is shocking.
Yeah,
to be honest.
So they are like a soap opera in Shantytown. I mean, like
it's incredible.
It is. So it seems to me that Pearsall is going to probably have a nice camp. We're going to see some nice moments probably from him, and then when it's time for everybody to suit up and start, he's probably going to have a small role, or when he does get relied on to do some things because he doesn't have a set piece role. They're going to ask a ton from him, and his mind's going to be swimming, I think, a little bit, just because that's what happens with rookies, and with maybe not a one role playing time, and then when he's going to be one of those guys that's going to get overwhelmed with tight man coverage against top corners when he has to face it, and then the little bit of time he gets in the slot, he's going to be just. He's probably not even going to – he'll be used as a gadget player maybe occasionally. Yeah,
it's going to be really interesting because, you look at, the role. And it's funny because he could probably play either, the X role in that offense, right, or play the Deebo Samuel role. Not as well as either one of those guys.
Yeah.
So that's the interesting part is, if either one of those guys leave, he can play that role but not play it as well. So, what do you do with that guy then?
Yeah.
So that's the tough part is you just don't what does that look like in that offense? Because, if Ayuk leaves, are they going to rely on Ricky Pearsall to take his place? From a timing perspective with Brock Purdy, do you want to risk that? The less risky move is obviously getting getting rid of Debo. Because with McCaffrey, like, I'll be honest, like, Debo's a little bit more obsolete.
Yeah.
Doesn't really matter as much to the flow of that offense because you kind of have to scheme Debo touches. Like, he's not a pretty route runner by any means. He's not a technically advanced receiver. Can't play inside. Can't play outside. Can play inside a bit. But if Pearsall can play the Debo role a little bit better than Debo at receiver, but not as a pure runner. So that's where it's kind of a tough sell.
Yeah. Like if Pearsall were in Indy or Cleveland, you know, I would, or Cincinnati for sure. You know, if he found himself in any of those teams, I'd be a little more excited about him early. So what about players who, you know, in contrast to all these players that we're saying are going to sizzle in camp, but maybe fizzle in the regular season as rookies? Who's a player that maybe is quieter on the camp radar for the beat writers because they don't show the things that some of the beat writers normally look for, but maybe the coaches and players are like, yeah, this guy, even though they're not saying much about it, and then that guy sizzles in games despite a quiet camp.
Yeah, for sure. I think probably the two is going to be Luke McCaffrey. I think he's a big one because I think he might be the most reliable target in that offense outside of Terry McLaurin. I just think he can do a lot well at the catch point, especially working the middle of the field. And Terry's a really good level 3 threat, one of the best in the NFL. But I think an area that they need a reliable safety blanket, which McCaffrey could be. Another one is Jalen Polk. I think he's one of those receivers that's not super sexy. But there's a lot of guys in the league that aren't the sexiest players, but are going to be long-term producers because offensive coordinators and coaches can rely on them down to down. That's a super important thing. St. Brown, Puka Nacua, Jacoby Myers, Chris Godwin, Khalil Shakir, guys in that archetype are valuable players. And you can grow your offense on those guys too because you know where they're going to be down to down. You know what their role is. It's clearly defined. And you don't have another one of them, which is the good thing about players like that, where those guys they're kind of cogs of your offense because they're important. You know, and a guy like Polk, great blocker, right? Very fundamentally sound and good power at the point of attack as a blocker. Does really good things at the catch point, aggressive and physical after the catch, competitive. But that's the stuff you're not going to really see until game-like situations. Kind of like with Amon-Ra St. Brown as a rookie. It's like you didn't really know he was, you know, as good as he is. And it's not that Amon-Ra St. Brown's this mega talent. It's just he knows where to be, when to be there, and he's on the same page with the quarterback. He's aggressive at the catch point. He's a competitor. So you can build your offense around those guys. And I think that's kind of what Mayo wants to do.
Yeah, I love it.
Build his offense around competitive players like Polk. So he could be a long-standing Patriot, I think, and can, if he leads the team in receptions this year, I would not be surprised.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, I mean, listen, I'll put Annias Smith in there as a guy who as the third receiver, because you look at, they've got Campbell and Devontae Parker, and no thanks. I just don't. I think they've proven what they are, and maybe they'll end up with that role if Smith just doesn't seem to catch on quickly. But he caught on so quickly into a new role that he did. I think there's a lot more upside to this guy, and even A.J. Brown was talking him up in the past week.
For sure.
I think he'll get use in this offense because, in all honesty, I think he has more juice than Kenny Gainwell. And he may not be as smart of a runner as Gainwell, but he has more juice and it gives you more options out of the backfield. So you could use him in kind of that Danny Woodhead type of role if you want to kind of modify that Woodhead type of role.
100%, especially when you're going empty.
Yes.
As the Eagles do a ton.
Yes.
And that was the one thing, like last year, like you go empty with DeAndre Swift and it's Swift on the boundary is not going to do anything.
No.
Right? He doesn't have that skill set. But you go empty with Smith and then rotate him in the backfield.
Yep.
You know, run some motion, or you can just give him the ball, right? And like that's the stuff you can do with him. You can't do with Gainwell, right? And you can't do with Barkley.
No, because you need Barkley to hold those linebackers and safeties 100%. In the backfield.
100%. Yeah. So you can see a bigger role with Smith than I think some are letting on, and he's kind of getting lost in the shuffle. And also, too, the new kick return rules benefit a guy like Smith tremendously.
Yeah, without a doubt. I'll add Brendan Rice to the role because I'm just not confident in any other receiver other than Ladd McConkey. And, you know, Palmer's okay, but he's kind of – Palmer to me seems like he's going to be a slightly better version of Chris Conley. In terms of like what his career looks like, you know, kind of a career journeyman type. I could see Rice being that guy who, you know, he has some drop issues, but I love how he kind of reminds me of Juju Smith-Schuster, like early career Juju. Just in the way that he runs, after the catch, he just has a feel for being able to break tackles, make people miss. He makes some good plays. I don't think he's as polished as Juju was right off the bat. But there's something about his game that I could see if thrust into the situation, he rises to the occasion. And then if I'm going to add a player who just like, not this year, though an injury could put him there, but I think next year. And the team's talking about him like he's gonna, you know, he's like a day 3 pick, and we're gonna use him on special teams, and he's just a great football player. And the guy's like, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'm just so glad I'm playing with C.J. Stroud again, and that's Cade Stover. I think Cade Stover is one of the most underrated players in like heavy tight end drafts, and it's like him and Eric All are the 2 tight ends I find myself going, those are decent values. I'll take a shot. If I don't win on it, I didn't overinvest in the position. But if I win out on it, I got really great value. And I just see Cade Stover being that guy that, you know, they have these quick twitch, you know, or tall, athletic wide receivers. But I can see Stover being the complement who's like doing the dirty work, you know, and he gives you the tough yards. And like you said, Farmer Gronk, like that totally sums it up perfectly.
Farmer Gronk. No, for sure. And on the tight end train, I think an interesting one is going to be Jared Wiley.
Yeah.
Right? Kansas City, because, you know, like that's a big – there's going to be a big hole left when Travis Kelce retires, whether that's this year, you know, this after next year, I should say, or the year after. And I think Wiley's a guy with a lot of athletic upside, right? He's a big target. He can really help them vertically, I think, as a seam tight end. But I think he's an interesting one because we don't know who the incumbent's going to be, right? So that's an interesting one as well.
Yeah, I love that one because it kind of also leads into the next question, which is because for me, he's the player fit where you're most willing to entertain a positive outcome greater than maybe your pre-draft report in a vacuum. Like, because I looked at him and said, if I can see, I've joked about those tight ends who you draft, the NFL drafts in 5th and 6th round, like Will Mallory and Luke Stalker, and you're like high cut, go up and win the ball, but they got the reduced Kenny Galladay wide receiver role that's, you know, that they tend to overdraft. And I could see Wiley failing in that direction, but unlike those guys, I could see him succeeding because he does have the bend and the ability to run after the catch, and he's not awkward doing it, and he shows some ability to drop his weight and develop as a timing route runner. So with the Chiefs and with Kelce being still there for, you know, at least this year, you know, you get that opportunity for him to sit behind someone, and Noah Gray, who's like just a good football player.
Right.
So he's in a good room to learn. You know, like if you were in the Atlanta Falcons room like early on, and you had Kyle Pitts, who's like a wonderkin, and then you had a bunch of guys who were eventually going to be coaches, but maybe not great veteran talent. at that time.
Sure.
Like Hayden Hurst, who was like, got some athletic ability, but he's a limit as a tight end. Jonnu Smith might have been a better option last year.
For
But,
sure. No, I
earlier
agree.
rooms where they had some of those guys where you go, it's Pitts and nobody else really, or like one dimensional guys who you really take you under their wing completely because they had who they have Luke Smith, or who's that gigantic like offensive
Yeah.
lineman,
Yeah,
who's
yeah,
used as a blocker, but he's technically a tight end. I mean, you're not going to model your game as Jared Wiley after that
Right.
dude.
Right.
So the former
Yeah, it's a good
Bills
situation.
pick, yeah, it's a good situation for him to really sit and figure it out or get some, a little bit of playing time and go from there. Who's one of those guys for you that you're like, okay, didn't love him in my scouting report, but I could see upside for him, and now where he's fitting here, I'm much more willing to entertain the positive outcome.
I think my big one is Johnny Wilson.
Okay.
Just because I think, I don't know, it's like Howie Roseman actually came out was like, we drafted him because at that time, we just draft freaks. Basically, he's like, we just draft guys who are just different. We're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But there's like a third, there's a third receiver role in that offense that's up for grabs, right? Obviously, your top three targets are pretty well set, Brown, Goddard, Smith. But there's a next guy that's kind of looming, and we don't know who that is, right? And no one's taken that role yet. So he's one for me that I could see. I think the other one is Trey Benson. I wasn't super high on him and some of the concerns, especially cognitively, like we mentioned prior. But I think he's in a really good spot to learn. And same with Marshawn Lloyd. Wasn't super high on him. Same concerns or similar, but in a good spot to learn behind a good veteran back. Jacobs and obviously respectively in Arizona, James Conner. So those are guys for me, I think, that kind of fit that mold from that capacity. But also, too, one I think I wasn't uber high on, and I'm like, you know what? I think they're going to bring him along the correct way is Drake May.
Okay.
I think that's a big one. I think Mayo wants to do right by this kid. I don't think he's going to be rushed out onto the field. I could see him sitting his whole entire rookie year and then being completely okay with it. That's not a winning roster regardless of if he plays or not. Yeah. That's the thing. You have a super young core of weapons. Ramon J. Stevenson is a average to slightly above average option at the running back position. Not something you can lean on as an engine of your offense, in my opinion, at this point. But they're setting Drake May up for later, which I think is really important. And he was one I wasn't super high on. The 3-level accuracy was spotty with May. I think he has all the physical traits you could ask for, right? Big, strong kid, great arm at all 3 levels, right? Can throw it to every quadrant you want him to. It's just the consistency in learning how to create in an NFL system is vastly different than creating collegiately. So I think him learning behind a veteran like Brissett, I think it'd be very good for his career. And I think Mayo's setting him up for success and setting the organization up for success correctly, have success, like I said, long term.
I am rooting for them to do that. I will be so pleased to see him not seeing the light of the field until like 13, 14 or later. And just maybe in mop-up duty to get some opportunities. I agree with you on Lloyd. I think that's one that was easily like, okay, now where he's couched and where they put him up, they've set him up for success, but they've couched it where he's not an abject failure if it doesn't work out this year.
Right.
So I'm definitely liking that one. I'm Troy Franklin to me. I'm kind of looking at that and going, okay, he gets an opportunity to be with somebody he's familiar with in a system where you could see some quick hitters for him. You could also see him get some opportunities deep. He could get a little bit of an earlier role, and it kind of reinforced my willingness to go, yeah, I'll take a chance on him sometimes. That feels pretty good. I'm going to give one that maybe I think he's set up for success only because the situation historically has been pretty much a disaster in terms of the team, and that's the New York Jets. But I think Jordan Travis is a gamer. I think that as he's one of those guys that he has work to do, but he's one of those guys that you could watch his game and go, he's had to figure this out on his own. And he's done a pretty good job for a guy who's had to figure this out on his own.
No, I agree. I think before his injury, I think he would have been
up there with Radler.
Yeah, I think he'd been a third, fourth rounder before his injury. He has a lot of talent, and you're right. And now he gets to learn behind Rodgers and Tyrod Taylor, right? So it's a good room. Yeah,
it's a good room. It's a good combination of those guys. And if he just sits and listens, and then, by next year or 2 years from now, they may need him, And I have a feeling he's one of those guys. He's one of those guys that you're going to watch and go, it's kind of like watching Jaylen Herz early in his career, where where you watch it and go, he doesn't really know what he's doing right now, but he sees things the way you want someone to see it. He's just got to get that. He's got to get the theory of quarterbacking snapped in.
100%. I remember watching Jaylen Herz when he was a rookie. I think it was a game against the Cardinals. Actually, he played.
Yeah.
And I think they were kind of getting drummed. But I'm like, there's something to this Hertz kid. He's just playing better ball than Carson Wentz. And the one thing you start to understand when you watch quarterbacks play, and I'm by no means like a quarterback guru or someone who understands the position, but the one thing I could tell is the guys on the sideline wanted him to do well.
Yeah.
They were playing for him. And Carson Wentz, you kind of got the vibe where he kind of lost, the air kind of went out of the room when he came on the field, you know what I mean? So it's that's a big thing because these are professional athletes. Effort is a big, big deal here. Right, these are multi-millionaires on the field. So that was a big deal in watching a guy like Jaylen Herz, was you knew those guys were playing for him, and they've had a lot of success, and I think Jaylen Herz has been a big part of that, and they set him up with really good weapons. But I think that's something, too, where if in 2-3 years, Aaron Rodgers is tail end of his career, why not Jordan? Why not Jordan Travis?
Yeah.
Why not give him a shot? Especially if that organization isn't going in the direction that they expect it to.
So does this also apply what you explained to Aiden Okon and why Antonio Pierce is we're giving Antonio this isn't Gardner Minshew's job to lose. This is Aiden O'Connell's 100%. Job to win.
Yeah, I think here goes this. I think you want to see what you have in him because he went into a less than ideal situation last year. And did okay.
Yeah.
He was actually fine. He wasn't a world beater, but he was solid for a rookie quarterback in a poor situation. But I think, if you're Antonio Pierce, you at least want to give him the chance to win the job. And Gardner Minshew is nothing more than a bridge QB, right? I don't think he's anything more than that at this point in his career. He's a placeholder.
A great backup, good guy to have in your room.
High end backup. Yeah. He held. When you watch Philly, when he was in Philly, if they didn't have Gardner Minshew, they would have lost a lot of games. The difference between him and Marcus Mariota was
gigantic,
insane.
Yeah.
So having a guy like that on your team and on your roster is super impactful. But I think Aiden O'Connell has a chance to win that job, just because I think you want to see him sink or swim first before deciding, hey, is this the guy that we want to be quarterbacking our team for the future or not? It's gonna be the sink or swim because what Gardner Minshew's gonna give you.
Yeah, Minshew's like the Crash Davis from the movie Bull Durham, the baseball movie, way long time ago, played by Kevin Costner. Yeah. He's like the minor league guy who was in the majors for a little while, sure. And now he's helping the guy who's got the big arm, and he's helping him figure out how to play the game, right. And that's what Minshew is in this. So we're in the Vegas area, talking about these two guys, and I just want to guess. I don't know if I'm right, but you pose the question for tonight is who will be the biggest riser at running back and receiver at this time next year? Is one of the guys on your list a Raider?
It's not actually.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's not Dylan Lobby, which it could be.
Okay.
I think he could be a definite riser. For me, at receiver, it's got to be Jermaine Burton.
Yes.
I think that's a big one because it's that offense is. I think he could end up being a better player than T. Higgins is.
Yes,
absolutely, 100%. I think he offers you so much more, and I think he can be a better complement to Jamar Chase. And that's a big deal in that offense. They need that. The one thing T. Higgins can't offer you is the post catch stuff. Near zero post catch, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Jermaine Burton offers you some good movement intellect, competitiveness, and can take some of the burden off of Jamar Chase, which is super important. Like AJ Brown and Devontae Smith work so well together because they can take some off of each other's plates. They're both exceptional players in their own right, but AJ Brown's had his best years with having a true 1B option. And I think T. Higgins is more of a 2 than a 1B in my opinion. He's a good player, but I don't think he's quite the talent of a guy like Devontae Smith, right?
Yeah.
But Jermaine Burton, if he gets to that level, I'm not surprised. He's a big one for me. At running back, I think my fun one is Tyrone Tracy.
Ah.
I think there's something there with that kid because he's just such an unorthodox range mover who just figures everything out on the fly, but he's so hard to plan for in space. This offense in New York is in dire need of a playmaker. Like, besides Malik Neighbors, you have Wan'Dale Robinson. Devin Singletary is an okay back. He's on the lower end of lead backs you'd probably want in the NFL.
Yeah.
But why not give Tyrone Tracy a shot to win that job for the near future? Because he can offer you something as a receiver too. That's a really big thing. He played receiver at Iowa and at Purdue. And he was actually okay. He wasn't a world beater at receiver, but he was good. But he offers you some definite ability to separate against backers, and I think he's one of those candidates. I think for next year we could be talking about a huge rise because right now, like, I've been getting him in rookie drafts in the 5th round.
Yeah,
like he's basically free.
Yeah.
So a guy like that who has a chance, who has a weak starter, who has a chance at winning the job in 2025, I think definitely take a chance on a guy like that. Who are yours?
Yeah, I'm going to stick at running back. Lloyd's an easy one just because of the way the contracts are set up with Dillon and Jacobs having an out next year in his contract. That just gives you an understanding that if Lloyd can take some of that early career Aaron Jones role from Jacobs and have a role, that's a good sign, and that means that Jacobs could see his way out the door in 2025, and Lloyd's the lead guy. But if Lloyd has trouble even beating AJ Dillon like year one, then we know that he needs a little more work, and he's more on that Tank Bigsby kind of track right now. So he's one that certainly fits. I think that Blake Watson is another one, because listening to Sean Payton this is what you want to hear. When Sean Payton is like, listen, running backs, they're all very talented when they come into this league, and that's a guy who gets it. Like, because most of the time I hear, most people who are like non-coaches go, running backs don't matter, the state, that kind of thing. But the real thing is that running backs have a ton of talent, and there's now less demand for a lead back because of the way they split apart and compartmentalize roles. So Sean Payton, when he says, look, whoever we bring in, we bring them in because we think they have a facet, and I want to see people compete. He said, I'm not predetermining who's getting a role here. We didn't do that with Jaleel McLaughlin last year, and we're not doing it this year. And who does he like? He likes the Pierre Thomas types, the Alvin Kamara types. And Alvin Kamara was not known as an inside runner coming out of Tennessee. Yeah. And I missed on him. Like, I thought, wow, this dude fumbles way too much. He bounces things out way too much. God, sounds a little bit like Marshawn Lloyd. But, he had those issues. And even Sean Payton said, first first training camp, I was like, like he railed on Kamara and told him, you got to hit this thing up inside. You can't run like this. Like you run like you're scared. I don't. And I think he told somebody that he didn't like Kamara that first summer because he was like he runs scared. And then he figured it out, and it was like a switch went on.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember. So there was a preseason game, and he just took like a 50-yard run to the house. It was an inside run, and then from then, if you remember, I think it was week 3 or 4 against the Dolphins that he went off, especially as a receiver. He was really good early. He was good at Tennessee, obviously, as a receiver. Yeah. And you could see that. You could see the contact balance and all that. It was awesome. But then it was remember what the running back room was like. But the reason why Alvin Kamara wasn't super highly sought after in the Dynasty community was that he was the third back on that roster because Adrian Peterson was the second back in that room.
Yes.
And then they ended up releasing Peterson because Alvin Kamara was so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it can happen. And I listened to Sean Payton's press conference a couple of days ago, and he was talking about Blake Watson. He's like, I'm not going to say he's like Kamara, but there are more similarities to what that type of running back that I like to deploy, right? So that's a big one because it all smells like Javonte Williams is not what Sean Payton wants it because he can't see it.
Yeah.
Right? He can't see the picture. It's similar to Marshawn Lloyd, similar to Trey Benson. That archetype of back they can have success in the league if they're brought along a little more slowly. But in his situation where he's asked to be the lead guy, it's just not gonna fit well in Sean Payton's system, especially when a lot of the runs that they're deploying from an offensive standpoint have to deal with timing.
Yeah.
And he can't do that. So I think it's going to work one or two ways. We're going to go into next year with either Audric Estime or Blake Watson starter, or we're just scrapping the whole frickin' room and he's going to draft someone hot.
Yeah. And I think that when you look at Estime, he's going basically at the pick 36, maybe the beginning of the 4th round. Blake Watson is really going at pick 59 in a lot of drafts, which is like the end of the 5th round. And to me, I have Blake Watson one spot over Estime and on my ranking board, so that makes him like you have basically 16 picks from where I have him to where you can get him. Whereas with Estime, you have to move up. You have to move up 8 spots just to like be in the running to get him, and that puts you in the realm of like trying to consider him and maybe Luke McCaffrey, who's sitting there. I'd rather have Luke McCaffrey, or
we don't know. Yeah, it's your good point because that's a good point for you because it's Luke McCaffrey's he walks into a room with no one's there besides Terry McLaurin. Jahan Dotson hasn't proven it. Like you don't have a lot of dudes that are starting caliber receivers in that room besides one. So that'll be interesting for sure. 100%.
Yeah, without a doubt. So anything else you want to share?
No, this is awesome. This is great. Everybody buy the RSP, by the way, have to get it. Matt's been so gracious to share all of his work. And it's a labor of love, but it's fun to dive into, man. And obviously you guys can find all my stuff on Angelo Analysis.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
We're going to be each week we're going to be just chopping down a little more, adding more metrics, things like that. But yeah, this is always fun. A couple more weeks, do it again.
Yeah, without a doubt. So hope you guys enjoy it out there. Obviously you can follow Brandon at Angelo_fantasy, me at Matt Waldman, and you can subscribe to this YouTube channel. It's under, I think, Matt Waldman's RSP Cast on YouTube. You can subscribe to that channel. I've split out the podcast from the film room stuff, so we can kind of concentrate on podcasts and film work separately, and that makes it a little less confusing to find things, or a little bit easier to find stuff. So thanks again, and you guys have a good week.